same problem of budget deficit every year, and now it's bigger than ever. Why this year is it bigger than ever?
Well, you know the old adage about the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. What we have seen with our legislature the last several years are tax cuts. You reduce the amount of money coming in for collections for the budget, and then you're surprised when the budget falls flat. Now, we have had the added major issue of oil and gas production costs going down. We're not seeing the production at the level where it needs to be. We're not seeing the cost per barrel. We're not seeing the jobs associated with drilling. So all of that ties into cuts in the budget. But too many of my former colleagues blame that solely. The tax cuts that have been going on are critical in this because it's reduced the amount of money coming in.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not collecting the money, you cannot expect the money to magically appear in the budget. They have to make these cuts. The way they've balanced this the last several years is increasing fees on people, like the $10 increase for driver's license.
Absolutely.
Agricultural fees went up for 4-H and FFA kids for testing animals. They're nickel and diming people to death. They took in, according to the Oklahoma Policy Institute, an additional $600 million in fees, which was about a 48% increase in 2013.
That's a tax increase, actually.
It is a tax increase. And I am surprised it has not been defined that way, but the legislature won't do that because they do not want to restrict their ability to raise fees.
I knew that was what was going to happen a few years ago when the tax cuts started, and I knew there were predictions. What's going to happen is all the fees are going to be raised, and that's exactly what has happened. We're paying more in these little bitty fees, and people are looking for different ways to get the lower income and the middle income to make up the difference for these tax cuts.
That's exactly
that not
right.
Correct?
That's exactly right. And you hear my former colleagues say, well, cutting taxes spurs the economy, and therefore more money is paid in to help grow the budget. That's only in an environment where your taxes are so high that it's restricting growth. With Oklahoma, most people won't believe this, unfortunately, but we are a very low-taxed state.
Yes.
And when you cut taxes, you're not spurring things. You're just taking away the opportunity for putting more money in for construction of roads. You're taking away money from the schools to provide tuition waivers. You're taking away money for the technology in the classrooms. You're taking away money where we have to put 30 kids in a grade school class. That is unacceptable. And that's what's caused by our legislature.
In a school in Tulsa, some parents have raised money to keep a teacher in the classroom in an elementary school in Oklahoma because they were going to move one around and there were going to be 30 kids in the classroom. It's not manageable. And if you have kids in a classroom that are discipline problems, if you have more than one of those, even in a smaller classroom, that's going to be an issue. Okay. Do you have anything else on state that you want to talk about before we get to federal?
No, I think you answered the question, all the questions pretty well, and I'm glad you brought up the classroom size thing, because my son is in the classroom of 27. And
how old?
He is in 3rd grade.
See, that's ridiculous.
And that's a critical year. The 3rd grade year is very important, but 27 kids. And we do the best we can with the teacher to inform her of different things, but she's limited because there's nowhere else to send these.
Henry Bellman, a Republican governor, worked with the Democratic legislature to pass House Bill 1017, which would limit class sizes and put more funds in. That bill was never implemented properly, and over the years, the legislature and the governor have gone through and removed every single one of those reforms to get back to the place where we were before, and it's going to be devastating for that future generation because these kids are getting shortchanged on the education they deserve.
Now, on the state level, help me make something real plain. Where does the money with gambling go into education?
That is a great question. And people ask me that a lot because they've heard time and time again that each of those programs are going to solve the budget. And before the lottery and gambling, it was liquor by the drink. And in between that, it was pari-mutuel gaming. Each of those has brought in money. Now, I'm only going to talk about the the gambling one, because that one's been the most recent and one on people's minds the most. With the two aspects of gaming, the lottery, that brings in about $30 million a year. That's not a lot of money to go into education, and that money is set aside for different programs, 7 different elements in education where it does increase it. It's essentially the icing on the cake. The budget should cover everything else still, and that was supposed to be additional money going to specific programs. School for the deaf, school for the blind, school consolidation fund, some for teachers' retirement, ways to help out those programs. But $30 million a year, it's nothing.
That is like spitting in the wind.
It is. When in the grand scheme of things with the budget, it is nothing when it comes to that. So when people say, well, that was supposed to solve all the problems, it helped, but it certainly didn't address it. Now, with the casino gaming, those are based on compacts with the nations, and the state gets about 7% of the take on the casinos that goes into the budget to help with those issues. 7% brings in a lot of money, but it's certainly not at a level that's going to solve all the problems.
Does that money go into the general education fund or something different?
It goes into the general revenue fund to be distributed. So education gets about 53% of the budget, so theoretically they get that percentage of the gaming money as well.
You know, and it's always sold off to us as though it's going to go directly into education. It's a guarantee it will go to education.
And this, the lottery, all the money did go into education. The only portion that was taken away was for gambling addiction programs. So that money is set aside, but you also have a problem, and I ran legislation on this with a Republican from the Oklahoma City area. We tried to set aside the lottery money for a period of 4 years, spend a quarter of it, or spend 3/4 of it each year, and then set 1/4 back for 4 years, where we would actually allocate the money that was cash on hand. The way it's done right now is it's on anticipated revenue from the lottery. So if the lottery sees a shortfall, they don't bring in as much as was expected. Since the projections are based upon what they thought, there's been some years where the lottery hasn't brought in enough money and the legislature has to spend more money to make up the cost of what was anticipated. So I personally think that should have been passed where it was just cash on hand, so we never work on anticipated revenue.
I'd like for us to switch over to, in the few minutes we have left, the